have a problem with homelessness in California. By the way, it is insanely hot in parts of the West. I don't mean to change topics, but I was thinking about living on the street and living in the heat. Now, if you're living on the street in San Francisco, you actually chosen a good city from the heat standpoint. It's only going to be in the 70s today, believe it or not, in San Francisco. It's in the inland areas of California, away from that ocean breeze, that you will bake. And then, of course, across the West, you will bake. The temperatures are brutal. I'm sure you'll have it in your news, Kim, but I mean, I'm talking about 115, 117 degrees in the next few days. That is not only withering heat, it is unhealthy heat. I mean, it will kill things. And so even as we talk about changes to the environment, to the climate, and the planet, you should be aware that heat alone changes the habitat balance. It changes the ecology, if you want to think of it that way. Get to more on that story. Now back to the homelessness thing. We've spent $17.5 billion working on trying to combat homelessness. In 4 years, we spent $17.5 billion. From 2018 to 2022, the state's homeless population actually grew. So even as we're throwing all that money at it, the problem with homelessness is growing in California.
So what are we doing wrong? Like what's going on? Where's the money going?
Exactly. Where's the money going? And we talk about it on this show from time to time, the homelessness industrial complex. There is a quality to this that is just like the Pentagon or the military or the healthcare system, where waste becomes pretty routine. You just see, you can't spend that kind of money and not see better results. But people are saying, if you talk to the governor's office, homelessness is big business, says Randy. I mean, clearly that's true. But, I will say this just in general, and this I think is important to remember. Someone is stealing that dinero, Julie says. Yeah, clearly that's true. But just because it's big business doesn't mean there isn't incremental improvement in the problem. Now, I'm not saying that's happening in homelessness, but I have this conversation around pharmaceutical companies. I mean, we all hate pharmaceutical companies and big pharma and all the rest. Sorry, I get these morning allergies. It's just awful.
I hear that.
And we talk about the problem of the pharmaceutical companies, and I always say, well, agreed. I mean, I can stipulate to the fact that pharmaceutical companies are big pharma is bad. But that doesn't mean that everything big pharma does is bad. I mean, you can be bad and still do good. I mean, I have Advil coursing through my body, and that's just a really low-hanging fruit example of the fact that it makes me feel so much better. My days as an athlete, of course, leave me a little hurting at times. So my point is simply painting the entire thing as crooked, I think really doesn't do the kind of examination of the problem that you need to do. So let's just move on here with $17.5 billion. They are saying, again, in the governor's office, that without the interventions that have been provided by a lot of this funding, it would actually be worse, the homelessness situation, than it is. More than 170,000 unhoused people now live here in California. But with $17.5 billion, the state could theoretically have just paid the rent for every unhoused person in California for those 4 years. I mean, even at the high cost of rent.
That just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
I mean, it's not reasonable. It's not a reasonable expenditure. What we're doing wrong. As a matter of fact, I was reading an article a few weeks ago. I think we talked about it on the show about the state of Texas. And Lord knows, I hate to give props to Texas, but what they're doing is so effective that cities like Santa Cruz and other cities in California, city leaders are going to Texas to see what it is that they're doing that's working for
And
the
what
homeless
is it?
problem in Texas.
And what is it that they're doing that's
Their
working?
focus is long-term housing. So they're not focused on emergency housing. They're not focused on, I don't know, a multitude of other things, setting up tent cities, security, buying hotels for temporary housing. They're not doing that. They're focused on long-term housing, getting people in and getting people in for the long term. So it's not like you find a job, you're out on your own. It's we're going to set up this house, this, apartment center. And once you're in type of thing is what I'm reading that the gist of it is. And that seems to be working. They're spending less and their effect on the homeless is much better than ours. They're actually making an impact. So
Wow.
well done, Texas.
Yeah.
Y'all can all go to hell, and I'm going back to Texas.
A total of $20.6 billion has been allocated through 2024 to combat homelessness. Again, $20.6 billion. Nearly $4 billion went to local governments to spend on anti-homelessness initiatives. $3.7 billion went to a program called Project Home Key, which also funds local governments, but specifically to buy properties like motels, commercial buildings, to turn those places into permanent affordable housing. So far, 13,500 units have been finished. I mean, that's a lot, but it's not enough. And that's kind of on brand for what Kim was talking about, which is this is permanent housing.
Yeah.
$2 billion from the huge amount that I just mentioned to you went toward tax credits for developers to build affordable housing. 481 new units completed so far in that affordable housing tax shift that developers are part of. Another $2 billion went to kickstart affordable housing projects that were stalled by funding shortfalls, and nearly $2 billion more was spent on emergency rental assistance. We've had wildfire seasons and the COVID pandemic, and that puts extra pressure on housing. So to be fair to California, our housing situation already an issue with insanely high priced housing to start. And then all the homelessness issues that Texas has and beyond. And then you add some of these natural events like the wildfires. It's tough. And COVID, of course, which affected all of us. The plan to formulate a pandemic plan for the state's homeless population was worked on by a Dr. Margot Kushel. There's a hefty report, apparently, that they just produced. It's a survey of nearly 3,200 unhoused people across California. Largest representative study of homelessness since the mid-1990s, Dr. Margot Kushel says. Director of the UCSF Center for Vulnerable Populations, commissioned by the state to find out who was homeless in California and why. And this is the issue in any political race in California. Kushel's report apparently got rid of some myths along the way. Number one, that many people on the street don't want a home. Not true, says Kushel. Participants overwhelmingly wanted permanent housing. Number two, many people on the streets of California are not from California. There's this sense that everybody comes to California to be homeless. And that's not true. 9 out of 10 people lost their stable housing here. They are Californians. And myth number 3, mental illness is the driving force behind homelessness. Yes, 66% of respondents did report, quote, symptoms of mental health conditions currently. But to argue a solution is more complicated than writing rent checks, is what's suggested here. Kushel questioned if mental health problems led to homelessness or if it was the other way around. People end up homeless and they kind of lose it. Most of those people, of that 66%, have severe depression or severe anxiety. Not surprising if you're experiencing homelessness, she said. Still, tackling the mental health issues among the unhoused is a major plank, according to this report, in the Newsom administration's effort. We're taking a new approach, he said. Rather than reforming in the margins a system that is foundationally and fundamentally broken, is what he wants to address. I mean, Gavin Newsom, as usual, says the right things, and to be fair, sometimes does the right things, but clearly this is a fail. You can't spend that kind of money and get such marginal results. Now, one of the things he's done is it the care courts?
Yeah, that's on the way in. It was
Yeah.
being challenged, and I don't know what the current state of the legal challenge is, but I guess we're close to getting care courts, which would
So
force
care courts,
people
I
off.
think,
Yeah.
are a game changer, and bravo for that. I mean, effectively, you can force some people into mental health help,
And
relative
drug
social
help.
services, and
Yeah.
drug help. Thank you. And sometimes that's a real issue. I mean, a lot of the time. So that
You have all these
that would address
outreach
part of the
people,
problem.
but you can offer help and people don't have to take it, right? So you have a lot of people that just say, no, thank you. I'm not going to the shelter. No, thank you. I don't like the rules they have there. No, thank you.
We had a
Just-
homeless guy against our exterior wall of the house, and he would scream all night,
Oh, God.
and he would bang on the wall and scream all night. He's crazy. Okay, I mean, I'm sorry, he
Yeah.
just was.
It's just the way it is.
And so we would call, and then when COVID hit, he was coughing on really loudly.
Oh, no.
I thought, well, he's got COVID or something. I don't know what the story is. So we call repeatedly, and what do? They come. They come 3 times this happened. I mean, after the 3rd time, as you'll hear, it's just sort of like, it's a fool's errand. I said, to the guy, we always say the same thing. He's doing these things, and they come back around. And these are paramedics. The paramedics say, all we can do is ask him if he wants help. All we can do is ask him if he needs medical assistance. All we can do is ask him. If he turns us down, we cannot move him. And there was nothing we could do. We just had to live with this guy slamming on the walls and, yelling.
Miserable. How long was
Yeah.
he there?
About 6 months.
Oh,
Courtney was completely unnerved by it, and
why did he pick your house? Do you live like in a very populated thoroughfare kind of area?
we were living in Venice, California. We had to move from our neighborhood because our home burned. Our home burned. The neighborhood
Sure.
burned down.
And that's what you moved into.
Yeah, we had to move there, and it was a gorgeous house. Gorgeous.
Yeah.
It was really a nice house,
Yeah.
and it was across the street from a noted artist in Los Angeles named John Baldessari, who lived in a Frank Gehry house. Frank Gehry, the architect. So I'm telling you, I mention these things because these are kind of a high-end-ish sort of. We were right alongside the golf course where Harrison Ford crashed his plane. You may remember.
Oh.
This Penmar golf course. So my point is, it was not. So you're alongside a golf course. You're, these known architects did the house across the street. You've got this famous artist living across the street. You're in this nice house, and still you're dealing with this homeless guy.
Yeah.
There's nothing we could do, Kim. Nothing we could do. We just had to live with him.
Intolerable.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to the guy, but you can't live like that. That's horrible.
Yeah, and so care courts might have made a difference in that
Yeah.
instance. But the mental health side is not the only side. We've got communities in this state that are refusing to build low-income housing, said the governor's advisor, because they say it's all just rapists and child molesters. So that's the dynamic. That's what we're facing. That's out of the governor's office. The state is suing a number of wealthier cities for getting in the way of construction of affordable housing within their borders. We reported that story, and I told Kim, they may be forcing that affordable housing, and there's down the throats of Marin County residents, of
Atherton.
Atherton,
San Mateo County.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. It doesn't matter where you live. Anyway, the idea of this homelessness study is a real good one. How much money would people need to make up the shortfall and stay in their homes? The people who are homeless because they don't have the money to pay the rent. You'd be surprised at the numbers. So people are, again, this is a huge study on homelessness. People are mentally ill, some of them, but as we were just saying, it's not quite what we think of. And then there are a bunch of people who are homeless because they can't afford a home. So how much money would people need to make up the shortfall and stay in their homes? Here's the quote from the doctor who did the study. One of the surprising things was how optimistic people were that relatively small amounts of money would have prevented their homelessness. For a lot of them, $300 to $500 a month would do the trick.
That's a minuscule compared to how much we're spending, right?
Thank you. That's exactly the point. You're spending all this money if you would just cut checks, supplemental checks. Food stamps are a guarantee. Healthcare is a guarantee. Public education is a guarantee, said the governor's spokesperson. Housing, 25% chance. Essentially saying you should be guaranteed of some housing in California. Now, the doctor who did the report, the Dr. Kushel, was asked how the state officials responded to seeing, the real breakdown, the first comprehensive breakdown on homelessness in California since the 90s. And Kushel said, I think they're on board. I think they're relatively on board. I don't agree with everything but I think they're trying. Asked what she doesn't agree with, she's refused to say. She said, I don't know. I mean, as you can hear, I really want to have a single-minded focus on getting people into permanent housing. And I think that is the root of how we end homelessness. Yep. She did agree that some politicians might be more focused on the window dressing of getting people off the street into shelters or motels rather than actually into permanent housing. And then the governor's office is saying, hey, we're facing a tidal wave and we're doing the best we can. That's a quote. To make, it's the idea somehow that we're just doing window dressing is something that they push back on in the state.
I know they're trying, but it's wasting the taxpayers' money and throwing good money after bad if you're just chucking money at a problem with no results. We have more homeless people now than we did when the throwing of the money of the 17.5 billion started 4 years ago. So that's not a problem solver. What we're doing isn't working.
Well,
we need a complete revamp.
To our Southern California viewers and listeners who live in Los Angeles, Mayor Bass launched a program called Inside Safe to clear street encampments. And she wanted to talk about the success of that, moving 1,300 people off the streets into motels. She met with reporters, but she wouldn't even estimate how many of those people have been moved into permanent housing. And as I was just telling you, that's really the issue here. They have $250 million set aside for this program, Inside Safe, from the $110 million that'll be used to pay for temporary motels. $21 million will be used for permanent housing. It's interesting. I find this report really revealing, Permanent housing is what's needed. And there is the money. There is clearly the money, as Kim says. We're spending so much money. $17.5 billion in just 4 years. And the problem has gotten worse. So, I'll find this report, which I have, and try to post it to Twitter and maybe even to Threads. So you can take a look at it. Those people who are interested in a closer look at this issue. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.